If you agree that true heroes often remain hidden in the shadows, make sure to like and subscribe. But first, let me tell you the story of Sergeant Kate Lawson, a 28-year-old sniper who lived and breathed in those shadows, far from the spotlight that's so often shown on the loudest voices in battle. Kate wasn't the type to draw attention to herself, nor was she the one who sought out praise. In a world full of soldiers yelling orders and charging into battle with their chests puffed out, Kate stood apart. She was the one who preferred to remain invisible, making her name only when the mission called for it, when the stakes were high, and the silence of a well-placed shot spoke louder than any battle cry. It was late in the afternoon when everything went wrong. Her unit had been tracking a high-value target, a ruthless enemy commander who had been terrorizing local villages for months. They were tasked with taking him down, and Kate, as always, was the sniper assigned to eliminate him from a distance. The plan was simple enough: find him, take him out, and exfiltrate the area. But, as with most plans in warfare, it fell apart the moment they stepped into enemy territory. They had underestimated just how deep the enemy's reach went. What started as a stealth operation quickly turned into an ambush. The enemy forces, positioned high on the surrounding ridges, waited for them to get too close, and when the attack came, it was swift and overwhelming. Kate's team was caught completely off guard, pinned down by a superior force, 20-1, the odds stacked against them like an avalanche of lead. The sound of gunfire shattered the mountain stillness, ricocheting off rocks, tearing through the dense trees, and creating a chaotic cacophony that drowned out all thoughts of escape. The team scattered, trying to find cover, while Kate, ever the calm presence, went to work. She had been through this kind of chaos before, too many times to count. The pressure of being outnumbered, trapped in hostile terrain with nowhere to run, was nothing new to her. But what was different this time was the feeling that the enemy wasn't just trying to kill them. They were trying to break them. And when you're surrounded, when your life is hanging by a thread, you find out what kind of soldier you really are. Kate was a sniper, a hunter, and she had never been one to run from a fight. From her concealed perch, hidden high above the battlefield, Kate could see everything, every soldier moving, every shift in their formation. She could even hear their voices through the crackle of gunfire, shouting orders in their native tongue, coordinating their assault. Among them, she saw one man who stood apart from the chaos, barking orders with confidence. He was the one in charge, the enemy leader. And in that moment, Kate knew what she had to do. They thought they had the upper hand. They thought their sheer numbers would overwhelm the small group of soldiers below. But they hadn't counted on Kate. They hadn't counted on her steady hands, her perfect aim, or the way she could turn the tide of battle with a single shot. With the steady pull of her trigger, the first leader fell, his body crumpling in the distance, his command cut short. The rest of the enemy force froze, disoriented, scrambling to figure out where the shot had come from. Kate didn't wait. She fired again and again, each shot picking off their leaders with cold precision, each one toppling their command structure like a house of cards. Panic began to spread through their ranks. Without their leaders, the enemy soldiers were like headless chickens, unable to organize or fight with any real purpose. They didn't know where the shots were coming from, and that uncertainty was enough to send their morale plummeting. Kate, however, never stopped. She was relentless, moving from one target to the next, picking them off one by one with surgical precision. Her rifle, an extension of her very soul, was a weapon of destruction and discipline. The battle around her raged, but Kate was in her element. She saw the world in a way that most didn't. While others panicked, charging headlong into the fray, Kate was patient. She waited for the right moment, the right target, the right angle. She had learned long ago that in war, speed kills, but only if you know when to pull the trigger. With each leader she dropped, the enemy's confidence faltered. They began to turn on each other, unsure of what to do without their commanders. Chaos reigned. Some fled into the woods, others dropped their weapons, but all of them were caught in the web of Kate's cold precision. As the last leader fell, the remaining enemy soldiers knew they were beaten. They were broken. Kate's team regrouped, finding their footing as the enemy scattered. The battle was over. Against all odds, they had won. The ambush had been turned on its head, all because one sniper, one woman, had stood alone against a force that outnumbered her 20-1. Her mission had been simple: eliminate the enemy leader. But what she had done was more than that. She had decimated their will to fight, shattered their command, and broken them with nothing more than her AR-15 and her unshakable resolve. As the dust settled, Kate's comrades gathered around her. They were all alive, all standing, but none of them had any illusions about what had just happened. Kate hadn't just survived the ambush. She had taken control of the situation and turned the tide with a steady hand and a clear mind. In that moment, they realized just how far Kate had come from the quiet sniper they had once known. She was no longer just a soldier in the shadows. She was a leader, a legend in her own right. Kate, however, didn't need any recognition. She simply checked her rifle, reloaded, and turned to face the next challenge. For her, this was just another day at the office, a job done well, no thanks needed. But her comrades knew better. They would never forget the woman who stood alone, outnumbered, and still walked away victorious. The mountain air was still, but the battlefield was forever changed. Kate had proven what true leadership was, not loud, not brash, but quiet, calculated, and deadly. The aftermath of the battle was always the same for Kate. A quick check of the rifle, a calm assessment of the surroundings, and a moment of silence before moving forward. The team gathered their wounded, tended to the few who had taken hits, and secured the perimeter. But Kate didn't linger. She never did. While the others spoke in hushed tones, piecing together what had just happened, Kate's mind was already racing ahead, calculating the next step. There was no time to dwell on victory. It was always about what came next. The enemy had been decimated, but they weren't the only threat in the area. This mission wasn't just about taking out one high-value target. It was about dismantling an entire network of insurgents operating deep in the heart of enemy territory. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the light started to fade, but Kate's focus only sharpened. The ambush had been a surprise, sure, but she knew that the real danger often came when you least expected it. The radio crackled to life. Her commanding officer, Major Daniels, was on the other end, his voice steady but strained. "Kate, we need you to pull back with the team. There's another group of hostiles closing in. They're aware of your position. We've got reinforcements inbound, but there's still a few clicks out. I need you to cover the retreat until they get there. Can you do that?" Kate's eyes flickered over to her team. They were regrouping, checking the maps and packing up their gear. They had no idea the true extent of the situation, no idea how quickly everything could go south. But Kate did. She could feel it in her bones, the tension in the air, the subtle shift in the landscape around them. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Roger that," she said into the radio, her voice even calm. "We'll hold the line." She didn't hesitate. She never did. Within minutes, she was already moving. Her rifle was back in her hands, her AR-15 now an extension of her will. She moved through the shadows like a predator, silent and efficient, scanning the terrain. Her team followed behind her, setting up a defensive perimeter as she took the high ground again. Her heartbeat slowed to a steady rhythm, the chaos of the earlier battle receding into the background. For Kate, this was when she felt most alive, when the storm was brewing, when everything was on the edge, and only her focus kept her grounded. She scanned the ridgeline with calculated precision. The enemy was coming. She could hear them now, the soft crunch of boots against the rocky terrain, the faintest whispers of movement. They were still unaware of her exact position, but Kate knew they would figure it out soon. They had to. Her team wasn't in the clear just yet. They were exposed on the ground, vulnerable to attack. And while Kate was confident in her ability to eliminate threats at a distance, she knew that time wasn't on their side. Every second they spent exposed was a second closer to the enemy closing in. Then, she saw them, shadows moving in the distance, advancing with purpose. Their formation was tight, coordinated. They knew what they were doing, but they had no idea who they were up against. Kate crouched low, her breath steady, her scope trained on the first soldier. He was leading the group, barking orders into a comms device. She could hear the faint buzz of his words through the static of the radio. His helmet glinted in the dying light, a small target, but Kate was patient. She'd wait. The first shot was quick, clean. A single pull of the trigger, and the soldier crumpled to the ground, his body falling without a sound. The others, still unaware, continued to move, oblivious to the sniper in the shadows. Kate shifted her position slightly, adjusting the windage on her scope as she lined up the next target. Another shot rang out, another enemy soldier down. She was already thinking ahead, calculating her next move as she pulled the bolt back and reloaded. Her shots were deliberate, precise, each one calculated to bring down the leaders, the ones who were directing the advance. If she could eliminate their command structure again, she could slow them down, create confusion, and buy her team the time they needed to retreat. But this time, it wasn't enough to just hit them from a distance. The enemy was getting closer, and Kate knew that soon. Her shots wouldn't be enough to keep them at bay. She could hear the heavy thud of boots against the ground now, and the enemy was beginning to spread out, searching for her position. It wouldn't be long before they realized where she was. Kate's mind raced. She needed to move. She had to cover her team's retreat while taking out as many of the enemy as possible. She couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. Her rifle was powerful, but it couldn't defend them all. She motioned to her team, signaling them to start pulling back. They responded quickly, moving silently through the underbrush, heading for the extraction point she had already planned. She watched them go, her heart steady but her mind still calculating. Every move had to be perfect. There was no room for error. The enemy was closing in, but they were still disorganized, still reeling from the initial shock of her attack. It was in this moment that Kate knew her next move. She had one more shot to make, one more target to eliminate before the enemy figured out their next move. If she could take out the leader of this group, the one coordinating the attack, she could fracture their strategy and delay them long enough for her team to escape. Her rifle was steady in her hands. She lined up the shot, her eye pressed to the scope, waiting for the perfect moment. She took a deep breath, the wind rustling in the trees around her, and then, with a calm that only years of experience could bring, she squeezed the trigger. The leader fell. The others froze for a moment, the weight of their loss sinking in as they realized their leader had been taken out. Panic spread through their ranks. They scattered, some running for cover, others falling into confusion as they searched for the sniper who had been picking them off one by one. But it was too late. Kate had bought them enough time. Her team was already making their way to the extraction point, moving quickly but quietly through the night. She stayed behind, keeping an eye on the enemy, making sure they didn't regroup in time to mount another attack. It was her job to cover their retreat, and she would do it until the very end. As the last of her team reached the extraction point, Kate slung her rifle over her shoulder and began to move toward them. Her heart still steady, her mind sharp, she made her way through the forest, knowing that for now, the mission was complete. But she also knew that war wasn't over with one battle. It never was. And there would always be another. Kate didn't stop moving, didn't stop planning. There was always another fight ahead. But for now, she could take solace in knowing that, once again, she had held the line. The silence after the battle was always the hardest for Kate. It wasn't the quiet of peace. No, that wasn't something she'd ever experienced, but the quiet that came with the weight of survival. The dust had settled, the shots had stopped echoing, and the last of the enemy forces had either scattered or been wiped out. Her team had made it out, but as they made their way back to base, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't over. It never truly was. Her team, tired and wounded but alive, moved with quiet efficiency. They learned long ago that there were no celebratory cheers after a mission like this. There was no mission accomplished banner hanging in the sky. Instead, there was the heavy weight of knowing how close they had come to losing it all, how one mistake, one wrong move, could have cost them everything. As they walked in the direction of their extraction point, Kate stayed at the back, always watching, always alert. She couldn't help but analyze the mission in her mind, replaying every shot, every movement, every decision. The enemy had underestimated them, sure. They thought they could overwhelm a small team, thought they could take Kate's unit out with sheer numbers. But they hadn't accounted for one thing: Kate's cold precision, the way she moved through the battlefield like a ghost, silent and deadly. But Kate wasn't interested in accolades. She didn't care if anyone praised her for taking out the enemy leaders. She wasn't in this for the glory or the recognition. It had never been about that. It had always been about the mission, the job, the survival. And right now, her job was to get her team out of this hellhole and back to safety. As the extraction helicopter finally came into view, Kate took one last look around the mountainous terrain. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows over the jagged rocks and the bloodstained earth. The enemy had been defeated, for now. But Kate knew better than to believe the war was over. She had been in this game long enough to understand that. The war was a never-ending cycle of survival, of outsmarting the ones who sought to kill you, of staying one step ahead. Her team climbed aboard the helicopter, taking their seats, their faces pale from exhaustion but resolute. Kate, however, stood at the back, staring out at the battlefield one last time. The helicopter's blades whirred to life, and it lifted off, the ground falling away beneath them. As the mountains disappeared into the distance, Kate allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had done her job. She had held the line when it mattered most. She had kept her team alive. That was all that mattered. The rest, the medals, the recognition, the praise, none of it ever meant anything to her. She had learned long ago that in war, you only get what you earn in the field. And Kate had earned her place, not by standing in front of a crowd, but by standing firm when it counted. As the helicopter soared higher into the sky, Kate closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the mission settle deep in her chest. It had been a victory, yes, but it had come at a cost. The world of a sniper was a solitary one, a life of silent sacrifices, but that was the price she had paid. She had never asked for anything more. And as the helicopter flew into the rising sun, Kate Lawson, sniper, soldier, and quiet leader, settled into her seat. Her mission was complete, but her job was far from over. There was always another battle, another fight ahead. But for now, she would rest. Because in the world Kate lived in, silence was often the loudest message you could send. And she had sent it loud and clear.